Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of our podcast series here at ACE, where we talk about the hottest topics going on in the financial industry today. And today's topic is the Omnibus Package, and we are going to talk about its impacts on ESG risk management for financial institutions. And I'm your host, Jessica. And with me, I have my colleague, Lize.
Yes, thank you, Jess. Of course, a really interesting topic and very important today. So let's go into detail a bit more.
So to give a quick overview of what the Omnibus Package entails, it was proposed by the EU Commission and it was inspired by a report done by Mario Draghi and the initiatives of EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. And the goal was to reduce the regulatory burden on companies, especially the SMEs, while still preserving the Green Deal objective. What are the biggest changes that we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think one of the main changes that we're seeing also ties in to what you just said, so reducing the burden on the SMEs. And one of the key changes here is the value chain reporting cap. So companies are no longer required to collect extensive sustainability data from those SME, really with the aim to reduce this burden on those SMEs.
Yeah, and this, of course, could compromise for financial institutions' transparency, right? Because they're not able to collect the detailed ESG data from their suppliers.
No, definitely. So they really need to consider the impact of getting less sustainability data from their SMEs, and they need to think about how they're going to leverage and make sure that they address this gap.
And what's another change that's happening here?
Yeah, I think another really crucial change that has been proposed by the EU is, of course, regarding the relaxed stakeholder engagement. So that means that initially companies had to do a reach out to every affected stakeholder, in essence, indicating that they had to reach out to NGOs, nonprofits, the supply chain, but also their own workforce. And right now that's going to be a little bit relaxed, given the proposal, indicating that companies can really rely a bit more on their internal assessments rather than doing this extensive outreach that they had to do initially.
I see, but then the risk here could be that there's less inclusive stakeholder engagement, right? So all their data could also not reflect the opinions of certain stakeholders that really are affected by them.
So, of course, this is a proposal and it's going to be relaxed. Doesn't mean that companies have to adhere to this. In a sense, there is a risk, definitely, but companies have quite extensive internal assessments in place already. And we need to make sure that those internal assessments really accurately reflect the stakeholder engagement that should be done.
Okay, but let's take a step back here and go back to the basics, because we talked a little bit about CSRD and but there's other regulations that are also in scope. So maybe we could talk a little bit more about the smaller or more basic changes that are happening for all the companies.
Yeah, of course. So let's start with, I think, the key change with regards to the CSRD at least, is the scope reduction. So initially under the CSRD, around 49,000 companies were supposed to report. This scope has been reduced to only 10,000 of the largest firms if they reach the threshold of more than 1,000 employees. So of course that is a crucial reduction. Secondly, I think one thing that is really important is the simplified due diligence requirements, indicating that the companies really need to focus on the primary direct suppliers rather than the entire value chain. A third one that's really crucial is the expected revision of the ESRSs under the CSRD, where now the expectation is that the focus will more tailor towards the quantitative data points rather than the narrative data points. So of course that's going to minimize the burden on creating additional textual information, and the focus is really going to be on this quantitative information. And finally, I think an important one to mention is the assurance that auditors have to provide. So initially a transition to reasonable assurance was expected under the CSRD, but now that is going to be limited to only limited assurance. However, what we now see in the market is that even though it is still limited assurance, auditors take their job luckily very seriously, and quite extensive testing, evidencing is already required under those reports. So even though it might be limited assurance, the expectations are already quite high.
Yeah, and it's not only the auditors here, right? We also see that the expectations of investors, the board of directors, and other civil society in general is very high for this.
Yeah, of course, this has been a hot topic for quite a while now, and it's really crucial to transition to a more sustainable economy as a whole. So I think it's only fair that expectations from all those stakeholders are high, and those should be translated into a very honest and fair report provided by those companies.
But less reporting doesn't necessarily mean that these companies need to stop looking into their ESG risks, right? Because these risks are still very important to the companies because they affect those risk categories that are already a part of their operations, like the credit risk, the market risk, and the
no, definitely.
Yeah, the operational risk.
I think, of course, like you mentioned, reporting does not minimize risk, and ESG risk is going to be prevalent all over the world, and institutions really must stay vigilant in this regard. So, like you indeed mentioned, these ESG risks are in itself a risk, but it also really ties into these known risk factors that financial institutions face every day. And maybe to illustrate this with an example, of course, we've witnessed the devastating LA wildfires a couple of months ago. And besides the immediate destruction that we've witnessed there, there's also an indirect effect to those financial institutions, where homeowners of whose home is destroyed in those fires might face a bit of difficulty to repay their mortgages, and indirectly as such affecting credit risk for financial institutions. And even though with regards to financial institutions, the scope of this effect might be relatively small, it does outline how those ESG risks, and in this case specifically climate risk, has a direct influence on those already known risk factors like credit risk.
Yeah, definitely. LA is my hometown, so it was definitely really difficult to see that happening. Very sad for the people that were affected by that. But I think on a more positive note, I think we need to also realize that ESG risk management can also have positive effects and have those, and companies should really look into those business opportunities that can come from it instead of looking at it only from the risk avoidance perspective. Let's take, for example, the sustainability linked loans that ING has implemented. And these are loans that are tying the interest rate to ESG performance. And they bring about many benefits. One of them being that it lowers the credit risk because the companies are less inclined to have the lawsuits or the fines. And also they have long-term better financial performance. But it also brings about the incentive to be more sustainable in their practices because, of course, the interest rate being tied to those practices. I think that's definitely a really great example of how, this risk management, it was implemented for risk management, but it brought about a very nice opportunity for the companies as well.
Yeah, and I think this was also set out initially in the CSRD reporting framework, right? Because, of course, within this framework, the idea was not to focus only on risk, but also on impacts and essentially opportunities. Mm-hmm. And even though the burden with regards to reporting might be minimized, it doesn't mean that the companies have to focus any less on those material topics, whether it being risks or opportunities for that matter.
Exactly. So I think we can look at the Omnibus package having two strategic opportunities for companies, right? So one of them being that they can leverage automation and technology a bit more because, as you said before, with the narrative data points decreasing and the quantitative ones increasing, it will allow them to automate any of those, all the quantitative data points, right? And with the narrative data points decreasing, I think it will also help companies really focus on the readability of their reports because it's no longer a checkbox exercise of the ESRSs. It's more of a they can focus on telling their sustainability story in a way that means something to them. And I think the second opportunity here is that companies can really focus on starting to operationalize sustainability instead of reporting on it because the focus really shifts from reporting to actually being able to do your due diligence and actually implement all your sustainability initiatives that mean something to you. Because it now can free up capacity for you to focus on those sustainability topics that really mean something to your company. So I think what we can recommend companies to do now is to take a look at their DMA and see what topics are really important to you and focus on trying to find those business opportunities, like I mentioned before with the sustainability linked loans within those topics, and really focus on accelerating and getting those into your operations.
Yeah, of course. And the proposal of the EU Commission was never to minimize the impact of sustainability, right? So the goal is really to perform on the objectives set out in the Green Deal, and in a sense really to make sure that we act now rather than focus on reporting of what we're trying to do. So I think in that sense, like you mentioned, those opportunities that are being posed by the reduction of the reporting obligations, companies really have to take that and act now.
Yeah, it's really more about making your processes more effective and efficient more than anything.
Yeah, and also with regards to making sure that your company, your financial institution is resilient, not just for the short term and ensuring short-term profits and gains, but also making sure that on the long run you will have a resilient and sustainable business model.
I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you everyone for listening into our podcast. Let us know if there's any other topics that you would like us to dive into in a future episode.